So from what I've read and got into, ARFID is quite a new diagnostic tool, and by getting a diagnosis, would that what does that mean for? Like, could I get funded? Could a child get funding for treatment with a diagnosis, or can you just go private without a diagnosis? Is it just
So ARFID, it was, I want to say 2013, it became a official diagnosis.
Sure.
I don't really know why, but we haven't quite recognised, or not we, the country, the health system, haven't quite recognised it yet as like something that can be funded on that diagnosis alone.
Sure.
But what it can do is open up to some disability allowances to again help to cover some dietetic appointments or OT appointments. It can open doors in that way.
Yep.
But I think we're still a little way off it being more widely recognised. So you don't need a diagnosis to go down the private. Actually, you don't need a diagnosis
or
for
public.
Yeah,
sure.
You don't need a diagnosis for either.
Yeah.
I think what a diagnosis does is provides a sense of relief for the parents to go, I'm not crazy.
Yeah.
This is what this is what's happening. You know, there's a reason or something to explain why this is happening. But also, I would probably say Google with caution as well.
Yes.
Sometimes you know it goes down rabbit holes. But so you don't need a diagnosis, but it can sometimes help with that piece. But like you say, often we find ARFID comes alongside a neurodiverse diagnosis, which in which case then you get funding.
Yes.
But with an ARFID alone, we're not quite there. Not quite there yet. Hopefully soon though.
Yes.
That'd be lovely.
Is this a is ARFID and selective eating or restricted eating a bigger problem than, you know, like this? I feel like I've lived this for 16 years and just finding out what it is. So is this something that's becoming a bit more known about, and also is there information out there for people to be able to access without having to look for it?
Yeah.
Definitely. Well, Health Info has some really good, has a really good page on fussy eating problem feeders, and that sort of talks you through the different, talks you through fussy eating and problem feeding. CDS has a few modules as well that go through feeding.
Yeah. I was just going to say there's so sort of ARFID, but also the group of feeding challenges, fussy eaters. It affects about 1 in 30 children.
Okay.
So it's very common.
Yeah.
Incredibly common when it's, because obviously you have your toddler phase of fussy eating, which is normal, common, developmentally appropriate. But it's when it extends for longer than 3 months, or it was happening before, but even from birth, from day one. That's when we kind of class it as a problem in terms of changes.
And that's what the Health Info page sort of goes through. I'm not sure if we can link it somehow. But yeah, that sort of talks about fussy eaters versus problem feeders and how to identify when it's become more of a problem feeding.
Because I think that's quite a common question, right? Is like, how do I know that this is something we're going to grow out of, or
at what point?
At what point? Yeah.
Is it like I feel like my daughter's got to 16, and I've just learned about this, and I could have, done intervened sooner. Yeah. So.
And I think early intervention is wise.
As early as you can see that there's something.
Absolutely.
Because the strategies for fussy eaters and problem feeders are essentially the same. We work on similar strategies.
I think the problem feeder one is just a lot more graded and a lot more slowed down and a lot more takes a bit longer.
It's longer,
Yeah.
And the success rate with treatment. From what I've read, especially in an older child or adult, that unless you're ready to change this and take this on board, it's not something that like they've got to put the work in, right?
It's a long road.
Yeah. So if you're, because there's kind of ARFID, which I guess is addressing more the psychological side of eating, but then there's also this whole other piece which is some medical complications, some sensory challenges, some feeding skill deficits, like that kind of piece. That's more where that early intervention comes in and is really helpful, and when we can target why the child is having a challenge, we can address it, if we know what it is, we can address it reasonably quickly, and you know, the success rate is quite good. ARFID is obviously a lot more, like pure ARFID is a lot more complex, because yes, we often, because there's that kind of psychological piece with that, if we do some things around that early intervention time, we can slow it or make some changes. But when you're in that teenage adulthood, if the child or adult doesn't want to change,
it's pretty
there's no real amount of therapy that, and it's kind of with anything really, like if you don't want to change what you're currently doing, no one can force you to change. But I guess that's where we have the ARFID, but we also have these other pieces, the sensory challenges in the meal time, setting up the meal times that we can address, that does support it a lot. And I guess it depends what your definition of success is. If it's just eating a few new foods, incredibly high, you know, like setting up those kind of things can be really helpful, but completely reversing and changing the problem, you know. But still there's little things that we can change that to actually make quite a big, even if it's just taking the stress off dinner time. You know, even if that's the goal, that's quite an achievable piece. I don't know if that actually answers your question.
That's really helpful.